Vote, vote, vote for Neddy Scrimger. He's the man to gie you ham and eggs. If you dinna vote for him, we'll bash your windies in, and you winna see your windies ony mair. I think since we've been doing some dancing, we can probably get you doing some street chants. Let's give that another go all together. Vote, vote, vote for Neddy Scrimger. He's the man to gie you ham and eggs. If you dinna vote for him, we'll smash your windies in, and you winna see your windies ony mair. In 1922, November, came the first election that the working women of Dundee had a vote in. And they were out on the streets chanting and making noise to get the vote out for Neddy Scrimger. Now, there was a couple of reasons that Neddy was their preferred candidate. He did come across to them as a man of the people who understood their struggles. He was a Christian socialist, he was a prohibitionist, and his anti-alcohol stance was popular with a lot of women who were feeling the worst effects of violence and poverty that alcohol addiction brought to their families. But one of the other good things about Neddy is he was not the sitting MP. This was a man by the name of Winston Churchill. You might have heard of him. Now, Winston Churchill was not the biggest fan of Dundee by this point, and it was mutual. If it wasn't the Irish workers giving him grief, it was the suffragettes, and the Irish suffragettes were the worst of all. There was a woman called Lila Clunas. She was a Glasgow school teacher working in Dundee, and when Churchill refused to meet with a delegation of suffragettes in the city, she posted herself to his address to force him to confront her. And there was a suffragette by the name of Mary Maloney from Ireland, and she made it her mission to follow him around for his entire 1922 campaign, ringing a handbell every time he tried to give a speech in public to drown him out. But in that same year, 1922, the Reverend Henry Williamson, now he was a Unitarian minister, he was a union leader, he was one of the good guys. He was on our side, but he looked at the working women of Dundee and he heard their voices on the streets and he looked at their clothes and their hair and their families or their lack of families. And he said, 50 years ago, she was a problem and she is a problem still. Now, 50 years ago from 1922 takes us back to the 1870s. This was the birth of Dutopolis, Dundee as a women's town. And Dundee was known as a women's town because the women were the ones who went out to work. And this was not for any liberation reason. It was not a victory for the women. It was because their labour was cheaper than that of men. But the side effect of this was it brought women out into the streets in their hundreds on their way to and from work. And when women gather, they found their voices. And the women of Dundee found many ways to be a problem. And one of the ways they did this was through their strikes, which were fueled on songs and chants and stories. In the 1890s, a group of women on strike from a mill went out into the streets, and they heard there was music playing there. Now, this was a band who had been hired to celebrate the visit of some minor royals to Dundee. And they heard this band who had been hired to celebrate these people who were supposed to be their betters. And they got out there and they marched in front of the band and they took over the music. And they chanted, "Ayo, ayo, we'll get a hecht o' wages, oh." Come on. Ayo, ayo, we'll get a hectare wages, oh. And as these decades of Dundee mill workers passed down their songs and their stories and their memories, some of the mills became haunted by legends of the women who had been wronged there. There's one mill known as the Coffin Mill. This is Logie Works on Brook Street, and it's flats now. But when this was a mill, there was a story that one of the women who worked there, she had either been mangled horribly in the machinery or she had been killed by a man, and her ghost was said to walk out onto the little iron bridge that ran between the mill buildings. And she would get halfway and her ghost would fall to the ground, to the cobbles in the courtyard below. But when her ghost was seen, like the sound of the strike song, that signalled trouble in Dundee. And strikes could spread as fast as a song or a story around the mills of Dundee. Now, around 1912, there was one of the women who walked with hundreds of others from her home in Lochee to Camperdown Mill. Her name was Susan Devine. She had been born in Ireland and come to work in Dundee. Susan Devine is one of the women whose names come down to us as someone who particularly used these songs and stories. Now, when the Great Strikes in 1912 started, Susan found that she could lead these hundreds of women out on strikes into the streets. And they dressed in masks and hats, and they dressed in as beautiful outfits as they could get together. And they sang and they danced and they played games in the street. And Susan led the women in a song that they knew from singing to pass their time in the mills. Oh dear me, the mills gaen fest. The pair wee shifters canna get nae rest. Shifting bobbins, coarse and fine. Wha the hell would work for 10 and 9? Now, some of you will know that song in a slightly different guise. And that is because one of the women in the crowds of these strikes, led by Susan Devine, was a teenage lassie by the name of Mary Souter. And Mary Souter, she heard that song there too. And she would hear it hundreds of times over and over again as she worked in Dundee's mills throughout her life. And Mary would listen to the life stories of the women that she worked with in the jute mills. And she wrote songs to carry their stories down. She is best known under her married name of Mary Brooksbank. And she wrote verses to go on that little chant that she grew up hearing in the mills of Dundee. And this is famous as the Jute Mill Song, and you can see it downstairs. It's in one of the exhibition cases, her handwritten version of that song. But I hope you'll indulge me if I go on a wee bit of a personal tangent for the last part of this. Because one of the women that Mary Brooksbank wrote a song about is a woman by the name of Jessie Brodie. Jessie Brodie caused a great commotion in a mill when she left to get married, and all the women were out celebrating and no doing their work. So this is another way that they used their joy as resistance. But Jessie Brodie was one of a big family of Dundee lassies. She was one of 12 sisters. One of her sisters, Dinah Brodie, when she got married, she became Dinah Farley. She married James Farley, a mill mechanic. And between them, they had 4 bairns, and 3 of them made it to adulthood, and 2 of them escaped Dundee like you were supposed to. They went to Edinburgh and had good lives there. But one of them, her son, Jim Farley, When he would come back to Dundee to visit his mum, she lived near Balgay Hill in one of the council houses there. And when he brought his young children back to visit family in Dundee, well, one time he brought his toddler daughter to the Timex picket line in her pushchair. So I started learning early that what you do is you show up and you make noise when your community needs you. But I also remember walking past the Coffin Mill, Logie Works on Brook Street. And by that time, it was empty. The windows were smashed and the machinery had been taken out, and perhaps that machinery had been shipped to Bangladesh so women could work it for even lower wages than the women in Dundee. But sometime around that time, I heard a ghost story about that mill that I could not get out of my head. And this history is what has been passed down to me, but it is a history that in some ways it's not really mine. It's a history of women who have lost fingers and lost hearing that I haven't had to lose. And it's a history of 14-hour days that I haven't had to work. And it's a history of dust that has not had to settle in my lungs. So I find myself asking me and all the other people who teach this history and who use it in our art and who pass that on to the next generation. There is a life in this history and there is a meaning in this history, but we always have to ask ourselves, who are we telling it for and how are we using it, and how can we make sure that we are a problem still?